A shadow slipped through the edges of the Forrester estate long before the first hints of dawn, a silent witness to every whispered conversation, every stolen glance, every heartbeat that pulsed through Ridge Forrester's world of silk and ambition. Cloaked in leather and regret, the figure carried a small camera, its lens trained on the opulent windows of the sprawling mansion, capturing Ridge's every move. The confident stride to the mahogany desk where he signed multi-million-dollar deals, the tender smile he reserved for Brooke in moments nobody else might notice, and most recently, the steely resolve that furrowed his brow when he learned Brooke's heart had been broken yet again. Unbeknownst to Ridge, the relentless gaze belonged to Jack Spencer, the son born of Brooke Logan's first marriage to Nick and raised with the knowledge that loyalty could become vengeance if stirred by betrayal. Jack's father had wounded him in spectacular ways. Now Jack's mother had been wounded by Ridge, and in those wounds lay a promise darker than any corporate rivalry, the promise of retribution. Night after night, Jack documented every instance of Ridge's triumphs and stumbles, compiling evidence of a man adored by the world yet blind to the destruction he left strewn through the lives of those he claimed to love. Ridge had courted Brooke in the golden age of fashion empires and red carpet galas, only to let her tumble into heartbreak when his heart once more gravitated toward the enigmatic Taylor. Brooke had stood by him through scandals and lawsuits, through bitter family feuds and tabloid exposés, yet he had slammed the doors of her trust when she needed him most. Jack's blood boiled as he recounted the stories Brooke had shared in confidence. How Ridge's casual infidelity had shattered her faith, how Taylor's return had reopened wounds Brooke had spent a lifetime trying to heal, and how Ridge's flippant vows had become daggers in Brooke's soul. Ridge thought he was untouchable. Jack was determined to prove otherwise. When Ridge slipped behind the wheel of his vintage Jaguar on the night of the Forrester Gala, Jack was already in position, hidden beneath a willow beside the winding coastal road that led back to Los Angeles. He watched Ridge's sleek taillights drift toward the horizon, the roar of the engine swallowed by the darkness, then crept beneath the car to execute the final, irreversible act, the careful severing of the brake cable, leaving just enough metal to look intact to an untrained eye. Jack's heart pounded with a mixture of cold resolve and a sickening thrill as he tightened the last clamp, then vanished into the underbrush before a single headlight could betray his presence. By the time Ridge realized something was wrong, when the brakes failed and the world spun into chaos, Jack was miles away, the silent architect of a tragedy that would reshape the Forrester legacy. The collision happened at a curve notorious among locals for fatal accidents, but this one felt different. Ridge's car careened off the guardrail and plunged down a rocky embankment, bursting into flame upon impact. The emergency crews arrived to find twisted metal and a windshield shattered like fragile glass, but no sign of foul play. To the police, it was just another late night crash, fueled by haste or distraction. Ridge Forrester, the titan of high fashion, the man whose charisma had shaped empires, was pronounced dead at the scene. The news exploded through social circles like a bomb. Brooke Logan collapsed in hysterics when they told her. Thomas and Steffi, his children by other marriages, wept in disbelief. Eric Forrester, patriarch of the house that bore his name, slid into stunned silence, the weight of grief pinning him motionless. The fashion world mourned a visionary, clients canceled orders, and reporters descended upon the Forrester estate, hungry for every detail. But Jack Spencer watched from afar, his victory shrouded in secrecy, his heart pounding with the knowledge that Ridge's final breath had been drawn not by fate or error, but by his own hand. Within hours, Brooke's anguish turned to suspicion. She rifled through Ridge's study, seeking solace in notes he had left behind, memories etched in ink. Among the pens and ledger books, she found a half-written letter addressed to her, its words laden with apology and longing. But something about his final line, a fragment cut off mid-sentence, felt wrong. She sensed an absence where closure should have been, a question that refused to be silenced. The police report confirmed the brakes had malfunctioned, but concluded the cause was wear and tear, not sabotage. Ridge's mechanic cited routine maintenance lapses. The findings were filed, the investigation closed. Yet Brooke's maternal instinct, a well of intuition refined by decades of weathering storms, whispered that there was more to this calamity than mere mechanical failure. She vowed to uncover the truth, even as she walked through halls haunted by Ridge's laughter and lamented the loss of the man she had loved through every twist of fate. Jack, hidden behind the guise of heartbreak and sympathy, infiltrated Ridge's funeral service, blending with the mourners who wept for a man they believed to be a hero. He watched Brooke cradle Ridge's casket, her sobs racking her frame, and felt a pang of regret at the sight of her sorrow. Yet he steeled himself with the conviction that without Ridge's demise, Brooke would never be free to find real happiness, and the Forrester dynasty, built on charm and cutthroat ambition, would continue to flourish on a foundation of broken hearts. The camera in his pocket held his confession, a silent record of every step he had taken, every moment he had sacrificed for vengeance. And as the service concluded beneath a canopy of weeping willows, Jack slipped away, leaving behind a legacy written in shadows. In the days that followed, whispers of conspiracy began to swirl around the Forrester circle. Thomas, unsettled by inconsistencies in the reports, pressed for an autopsy. Steffi conducted her own inquiries, enlisting the help of private investigators. Brooke, driven by love and guilt, combed through Ridge's final hours, retracing the coastal road, inspecting the wreckage site under moonlight, searching for a shred of evidence that might confirm her darkest suspicions. The world outside moved on, fashion weeks pressed forward, design houses launched new collections, and life, in its relentless procession, beckoned the Forrester name back into the spotlight. But beneath the veneer of gowns and gala lights, a current of vengeance still ran strong. Somewhere in the shadows, Jack Spencer waited for the moment to strike again, to unveil the truth at the crescendo of Ridge's posthumous legacy, ensuring that when the final act played out on the global stage, the spotlight would fall not on Ridge's brilliance, but on the consequences of his betrayals, and on the son who had avenged his mother's broken heart with the cold precision of a shuttered camera and the silence of a midnight road. In the restless hush that settled over the Forrester estate in the days after Ridge's funeral, a tension as thick as velvet draped itself across halls that had once echoed with laughter and ambition. Brooke, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights, stood before the grand fireplace in Ridge's study, scrutinizing a tangle of notes and diagrams she'd sketched on cream-colored paper, the angle of impact, the scorch patterns on the metal, testimonies from the mechanic who swore the brakes looked worn but functional. Each fragment felt like a jagged piece of a puzzle she could not let remain unsolved. Her fingertips traced the faint smudge of grease on the drawing of the brake cable. The line she'd drawn matched exactly the subtle abrasion Ridge must have felt in his last moments of control. And as her breath caught in her throat, she knew this was no accident. Somewhere, hidden behind the guise of grief, was a deliberate act of betrayal, and her son was at its center. Thomas, returning from New York under cover of business, met secretly with Brooke in the dim glow of the design loft, his voice hushed above the hum of the city lights beyond the windows. He laid before her the preliminary report from the private investigator, surveillance footage from the night of the crash showing a lone figure slinking near Ridge's car just before the accident, a gloved hand working beneath the chassis. Brooke's heart pounded. The silhouette, slender, determined, moved with the same stealth she had seen in the grainy recordings she herself had found. Thomas handed her a photograph. A distant, hazy shot, but enough to narrow the suspect to someone of medium build, someone who knew the estate's routines well enough to operate unseen. Brooke swallowed hard and thought of Jack, his youthful face, the fierce protectiveness he'd shown his mother ever since childhood, the way his eyes had flashed when he once whispered to her about Ridge's betrayals. She realized with a cold certainty that her own flesh and blood had become the architect of this tragedy. Meanwhile, Steffi, haunted by guilt that her own fractious relationship with Ridge may have inadvertently distracted him in his final hours, dove deeper into the forensic side. Under the cover of her newly assumed role as acting head of design, she accessed security footage from the private gates, cross-referenced car entries, and enlisted the help of a former police forensics colleague. Late one night, illuminated by the ghostly glow of monitors, she froze the frame on a fleeting second. A face obscured by a low-slung hood, but unmistakably the profile of a young man, Jack's jawline and the slope of his shoulders matching exactly the silhouette Brooke and Thomas had been tracking. The revelation hit her like a thunderclap. Jack had not only documented Ridge's every move, he had orchestrated its final derailment. Steffi's hands shook as she called Brooke, her voice tight with disbelief. "It's Jack," she whispered. "He did it." The confrontation that followed tore at the fragile bonds of family. Brooke found Jack waiting in the greenhouse, Ridge's favorite sanctuary, where orchids bloomed like silent witnesses under moonlight. He stood beside a marble fountain, the water's gentle trickle at odds with the storm in his eyes. Brooke's voice, both motherly and accusatory, trembled as she asked him why. Jack, his features carved with anguish, pulled from his jacket a memory card containing the incriminating footage and whispered, "You deserve the truth." He spoke of years of feeling sidelined by Ridge's insensitivity, of the endless nights he'd spent watching his mother's tears, of a vow he'd made to exact justice for every broken promise Ridge had woven into their lives. Brooke's instinct was to shield him, to cradle the boy who had once clung to her skirts. But the truth, as cruel as steel, forced her to step back. "You crossed a line, Jack," she said, voice cracking. "You took his life." And Jack's reply was a choked vow, "I gave him what he gave us." Word of the evidence leaked quickly, Steffi's rash decision to show it to Eric, Thomas's insistence on handing it to the police, Brooke's anguished plea that they handle it within the family. The Forrester estate became a battleground of conflicting loyalties. Eric, torn between grief for his son and love for his grandson, vacillated between calling the authorities and keeping the matter private. Thomas, determined that justice be served visibly, risked fracturing the family's public image. Steffi, furious with Jack yet sympathetic to his pain, found herself caught in an impossible moral trap. On the eve of the next couture launch, the boardroom, once hallowed ground for design strategy, was repurposed for an emergency meeting. The walls, draped with swatches of silk and sketches of tomorrow's trends, now bore witness to a crisis far graver than any financial setback. The son of Brooke Logan and Nick Marone would either stand trial for murder or be spared by the compassion of a family he had fractured in pursuit of vengeance. Brooke, at the center of the storm, made her choice under the grand chandelier that had crowned so many family celebrations. She stood and addressed the assembly. Designers, lawyers, family friends, as though she were delivering the final line of a script she had never wanted to read. With a voice both trembling and resolute, she offered not an apology but a reckoning. This family has loved and lost, betrayed and forgiven, but never before have we been tested like this. Jack Spencer is not a monster, he is my son, driven to a desperate act by wounds I should have healed. She paused, the chandelier's light fracturing in her tears. "We will handle this ourselves. No headlines. No scandal. Jack will seek help, and we will stand by him. But Ridge's death will not be swept under the rug. We will honor his memory by remaking ourselves in truth, not in secrets." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking into every soul present. In the hush that followed, Jack stepped forward, his hood dropped, his face exposed to the very people he had spied upon in darkness. He told them his story. How betrayal had bred a rage he could barely control, how love for his mother had transformed into something he scarcely recognized. His confession was brutal, his tears unbidden, and when it was done, he laid the memory card on the gleaming oak table, the small device carrying the proof of his crime. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out, leaving the Forrester legacy fractured and bleeding, but, in a strange alchemy of confession and compassion, also poised on the brink of healing. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, Brooke lingered in the empty boardroom, the first light glinting off the sketches that now seemed to map not just dresses, but the contours of her family's rebirth. She thought of Ridge, his laughter, his flaws, his love, and felt the ache of loss tempered by the resolve to build something new from the rubble, a family no longer sustained by secrets, but by the unvarnished truths that bind hearts together, however painfully. Outside, the city stirred, oblivious to the drama that had played out behind closed doors, where vengeance had nearly destroyed them all and forgiveness had become the rarest and most powerful silk of all. And somewhere, beyond the horizon of grief and redemption, a new chapter waited to be written.